Point the gun at the gap and you pull the trigger. Shot the gap. Go figure.
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
Welcome to Rotor Riot. Today we are in Houston, Texas. We were here for Quad Camp, which is a great opportunity if you'd like to come out, fly with us, get a little bit of help with the build, maybe figure out that problem quad that you just can't get fixed. We would love to help you. If you want to see all of our upcoming dates, check out the link in the description, quadcamp.com. But today we're gonna help you guys hit gaps better. We're gonna hit gaps basic ways, we're gonna hit gaps advanced ways, we're gonna dive gaps, we're gonna loop gaps, we're gonna knife edge gaps.
Just flying straight through is one of the first things that you'll want to learn as you want to start doing freestyle and racing. You can think of racing gates as a gap of sorts. So we're going to talk you through what you need to think about as you want to learn just to fly through them, and also some of the trick variants that you can do.
Drew, I really love the stick cam that you've got in your DVR. I don't think I've ever seen that before, actually.
That is a special feature of the Brain FPV Radix. They've got a graphical on-screen display so you can do fancy things.
Oh my God.
Did you like that Rotor Riot startup logo?
I did like that, actually.
Something to think about when you're starting this is just finding big openings to fly through. Okay. Like this awning here, getting used to flying inside something and then working your way up to smaller gaps. So I'm just kind of flying through this to get, and I don't even know if this would be like a gap per se. Yeah.
But if you're starting out, just the sort of basics of flying in a straight line, lining it up. Where do you want to line up the gap? Like, is on the where is the gap on your screen?
When you start, you just want to get it right in the center of the screen. So I'm just going to put these two trees right in the center.
The wind
fly
is
right through. The
blowing you a little bit. I think you were a little off there.
So just kind of the opening between the trees, center it up, boom, go right through. And then as you start to do tricks where you want to combine them, come out of something, maybe you know where you want to go through it. You'll start to learn where else you want to put it in the screen to line up to come out of other things. But when you're starting out, just start with a fair amount of distance
and just fly straight towards the gap
and commit.
And if as you're getting close, show us like an aborted one where you're kind of lining it up, but
I'm gonna go through this
the
gap.
wind doesn't blows you off course, or maybe like how do you know when it's not going right?
So I'm committed to this, and as I'm getting closer, I realize that tree is in the center and not the gap. I want to have the opening in the center to go through it. But if I'm getting kind of close, you can just bail out. But the whole idea is that you need to commit to it. Right?
Commit?
You have to not move the sticks as you're going through it. I think that's the biggest thing people struggle with, is they feel like they need to fight the quad the whole way through. But if you've got it lined up, look at my sticks. Once I'm lined up, hardly moving them, just flies right through. I see a lot of people, as they're coming up, they're worried they're not perfectly, so like left, right, left, right, left, right, trying to ensure that it's centered. But once you're centered, just let the quad fly itself right through the gap. You don't need to constantly be You say
let the quad fly itself, but I think that may be a case where somebody who's an expert is almost like, if you're not like what you're doing right there, just flying in a straight line at a consistent altitude is the very first thing you have to be able to do to hit gaps. You can even practice flying over a target, you see, instead of through a gap. Pick a target like a picnic table or something and fly in a straight line, line it up and fly over it. Then move to a gap. Like, for example, this pavilion, this great big pavilion, very easy to hit, big gap. And then you can start working straight lines through smaller and smaller gaps.
I'm gonna take everything we're talking about, I'm gonna head over to those picnic tables there. That's a really small gap. There's my table, kind of inspect the area. Ooh, this battery's so dead. So you get lined up and just don't move the sticks, just monitor. That's gonna happen. That's gonna happen. I mean, honestly.
What that demonstrates is there comes a point where you are kind of too committed to bail out.
Right.
If it's not lined up, sometimes it'll look like you're a little off and you just ride it and you go through and you're like, nail that. Those are some of the best ones, actually.
Right.
But at that point, when you're that close to the obstacle and you're on target, you're probably not gonna correct. You're probably either gonna just dump it or ride it out and hope you get through.
Right. So this is a very low gap. So once I get lined up, one thing I am gonna need to manage is my throttle. Just making very small changes to my throttle to ensure that I'm not too high or too low. Boom.
There you go.
That was
beautiful,
nice, clean
beautiful.
One. And then once you get really comfortable flying through different openings, it's just doing it a lot so that it just becomes second nature. I mean, I'm not scared at all to go through an opening of this size. I mean, I don't even have to really think about it. And then you can start playing with tricks that you want to do. Maybe as you go through it, you do a roll through it. And when I was learning to do tricks through gaps, something that I did to work my way up is I would go through the gap and then immediately do the trick, if that makes sense. So I'd kind of cheat it to practice it. So I'd go through, and then as soon as going through it, do the roll. And then I would start pulling the roll closer and closer to the opening. So that one I was clearly past the gap. This time I'm gonna start it a little earlier. I was already in the gap. I was already in the gap when I started the roll. And then what you wanna work your way up to is starting the trick before you get to the gap. So then you're doing it as you go through it.
And I noticed that you rolled to the right, and it looked to me like you maybe intentionally drifted a little bit left.
That is true, yeah.
Because you knew the roll was going to pull you to the right. When you roll to the right, you're going to get pulled a little bit to the right.
I'm glad I had you watching, because I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about it,
yeah.
But that is absolutely kind of like a subconscious. I know I'm going to roll to the left here, so I'm to the right, and then as I roll through it, I'm all set up. When you're doing forward and back pitch flips, then you want to keep it centered and go right into the branches.
That's a more advanced game.
Landed it.
Kind of move there.
I'm gonna be focusing on hitting gaps inverted. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're just gonna go out in the open field, and I'm gonna show you some of the different ways that you can control where you're gonna hit coming down and where you're gonna hit at the peak of the inversion. And now if I flip it inverted and tilt it ever so slightly to one side or the other, it will pull us off axis. If you're gonna miss it to the left or right, you can still do just what you do in normal flight, which is go from completely inverted to a little bit off center, and it will help pull you left or right. The other thing is if you want to overshoot the gap. Overshooting is always a good thing, because I can use, if I'm gonna float over, say this tree, I can just pulse the throttle and come down in front of it instead of behind it. So we'll do that one more time. Come at this tree. I would definitely float over that, but because I gave it throttle and pulled out early, I could have hit a gap right in front of that tree.
So what you're getting at is when you're inverted, you need to still use your throttle to steer.
Exactly.
So like if you're to the right or to the left or too far, you still need to aim and turn towards where you want to go and give it some throttle.
All right, so here we go. Gonna get a nice approach. I'm not gonna go too fast because we don't need a lot of speed. And we're through. Now, the most important thing when doing power loops to hit the gap, you don't need full throttle power loops. Full throttle power loops look like this, way high. We're doing a little power loop. We want just to modulate the throttle and come through the gap. I'm not going over probably 75% throttle at any point. It's almost keeping the throttle equal all the way through, with maybe a little blip at the top that helps accelerate us backwards. It'll do two things. It'll arrest the vertical motion to keep you from going too high, and at the same time, it'll also give you a nice little chuck to chuck it backwards through the gap. Now, if you're trying to do like a limited height, but throw it backwards a lot, then it's a bigger pulse. So it's like.
So one thing I'm noticing you're doing, the first two times when you went through it, you actually sort of just cruised right under the gap, and you didn't really even change your throttle. You just started pulling up to climb a little bit.
Exactly.
And then you just sort of bounced backwards through it. But you managed to keep your pitch slow. So your throttle and your pitch maybe aren't related completely, right?
Exactly. Now here we go. We're gonna hit the gap again this time. And that's it.
So I think another cool thing I'm noticing is it looks like when you're going through the power loop, instead of now using the ground as your reference, you sort of look at the bottom of the tree, right?
Yeah.
And I see you like approach it, you start getting real close to it, like you're gonna pull out of a dive. And as you see your quad getting close to the top of the tree, you just sort of, that's when you get on the throttle to arrest that ascent.
I said this in my power loop tutorial, and it applies here as well. Every side of a power loop is the same physics. It's just that gravity changes. So whether you're trying to get really close to a building as you climb, it's the same thing as if you're trying to get really close to a ceiling as you're inverted, or really close to a back wall as you descend. The dynamics are the same. The only thing that happens is that you always have gravity accelerating you that you're trying to offset. Now, if you don't go high enough, once you're inverted, there's nothing you can do about that. So it's always better to overshoot too high and use the throttle to keep from staying too high.
There was one thing I wanted to add and make sure it got covered. Your up tilt has a big effect as you're going into the gap. As to your ability to see the gap. If guys are trying to emulate what you did with low up tilt, they're going to find it really hard because by the time you can see the gap, you're already upside down.
So
the more up tilt you have, the easier it is.
This is absolutely true. Let's look at my up tilt. I run somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 degrees of camera tilt on both the FPV camera and the GoPro. They're basically looking at the same point. Now, the camera lens that I use, this is the Rotor Riot Runcam Swift V2, which has a very wide angle lens. And with that amount of tilt, I can't see very well to land. I can barely see to go slow, and I can barely see at absolute max speed. But what I can see really well is I can see that gap coming fairly early. When I transition from forward flight into almost just passing level, I can already start to see the gap coming into view. I ballpark how much thrust to use to throw me, because if you use too much thrust as soon as you see it, you're gonna overshoot big time. If you use too little, you're gonna undershoot. Now, as I see that I've thrown myself at it, now I'm watching the top of that gap, and I'm now modulating throttle to make sure that I don't go too high, because right now you can see that I'm looking directly backwards. At this point, I'm looking at my exit of the gap. You think that you would see this somewhere in the climb, but you don't. This is what you see when you are completely inverted in the gap. Notice that it's not just pulling me down, it's also pulling me forward. So if I've overshot it by a lot, I can now pulse the throttle to stop that forward momentum and accelerate a lot backwards through the gap.
And this is something I think that's really hard for people that are learning, because maybe you're all over the stick, maybe you're a little shaky with your hovers, maybe you can't cruise those straight lines. So I think a good way to sort of practice this kind of stuff is, you know, maybe line up some big, nice wide gaps, you know, so 2 vertical trees, don't worry about a vertical element, but maybe you start with a single tree. Sort of fly at the tree very slow, tilt your quad to the side and give a little burst. Just see how much throttle jumps you, how much to what sides. And then as you get more and more comfortable with this, you can start moving and working this into your maneuvers, so you know exactly what your quad's gonna do with how much throttle.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good thing to sort of practice and work on, is what does your system do and what does it feel like with throttle pulses?
Yeah, because that's something that I struggled with early on, was actually coming out of dives and figuring out when to start adding throttle and how much throttle to add. And I would bottom out and hit the ground all the time. Steele would be like, "What happened?" I'd be like, "I don't want to talk about it."
Pancake Master!
I did this in Louisiana, or I mean in, Lafayette, Louisiana, and like people were blowing up because it's a zero throttle thing. People don't know how to go zero throttle, and you can't do it with a lot of camera angle. There's a lot of different things that are varied by flying style, and this is definitely one of them that kind of suits lower camera angle and a little more cruisy.
What is your camera angle?
25 always.
There's a super, yeah, that's it.
Can you make it through that? Oh my gosh.
I think
What?
I can.
This
I
is
should-
the
I should be able
Mr.
to- I gotta
Steve
do
special.
a right roll to get through that one. That's gonna be hard. What's underneath it, and which way is the wind blowing? Because the wind is gonna affect
The
this a
wind is
lot.
blowing
Is it lateral?
from behind you right now, but kind of off axis.
That's the side.
Well, so do an easier one and talk us through the high level concept of a knife edge.
All right,
Knife edge meaning you're holding the quad
you have
sideways,
to go through
right?
it sideways. Like you can't fly through it regular.
So you're going through 90 degrees basically.
So like this, someone could say they were gonna knife edge through it, but you can just fly through it. Like you could practice by turning sideways, and you want to make sure you're sideways as you go through the hole. So you're like flying at it, you pop sideways, and you can like complete a roll as you go through. So you're sideways through the hole, complete a roll, or just pop back. I think it's easier to complete the roll, and it's always easier to pick like a particular way. Some people are more comfortable rolling to the left. I find that I have a little bit more ease doing it a full roll to the right and then a half roll to the left.
How early can you get into that sideways position and float through?
I mean, it's
Can you
all
really
about
exaggerate
momentum
it?
because you're at zero throttle. So you're blipping throttle,
Nice.
and you can stay. I mean, it's just an arc. How much do you blip the throttle? If you don't blip, I mean, you're gonna fall pretty quick. So here's not blipping.
Yeah, you ended up right by the ground.
Versus coming up at it, blipping. So you see the arc kind of happens
Yeah.
when you do it.
Well, and it looks like you're using a little bit of yaw to follow. Yeah, so the camera angle's following that arc that you're traveling,
Yeah,
which
so you
looks
can
really
see-
pretty.
You can see down. Yeah, it's actually a little bit harder to do
Yeah, where you
to
hold
that way.
Mhm.
I'm better at it doing it where I roll to the right. So I don't have much battery left. Do we want to find? Is there any smaller ones that aren't the death
Hey,
hole?
you know, you're almost
tree
dead
in
with the
front of us
battery.
is
Just
a
send
small
it.
one.
There is no question that to go
It
through
is
this-
really small. Like the precision is gonna be insane.
Oh man,
Did
that
you
was,
just do it?
I went through it, yeah, but I
did.
bounced through
You
it.
totally
I think
went
it
through
counts.
So I guess
Because you
I guess
cannot
can go
fly.
through.
You could not fly
Try this
straight
again.
through this gap.
Which way is the wind going towards that gap?
It's
it's coming head
almost
on.
coming right across it,
You
left
should-
to right.
Yeah,
The way-
favor the
right to
side.
left now. Right to left, the direction you're going
Right
through it
to
now.
left.
Yep.
Well, he got it twice.
I know.
Well, first
He did it
and
twice.
second try. That's insane.
I know.
That gap is so. Oh! Damn!
I'm pretty sure his foam feet are gone.
I think the cool part with this is you showed, like, if you show those parts, how he breaks it down. Like, he comes up, he looks at it. We talk about where the wind is and what you need to do. You don't have to hit this going 80 miles an hour. You know,
No, I was
hitting
like
it going
5 feet
like
behind
5 miles an hour, you just sort of bounce off it and tumble a bit, and you can keep trying this kind of thing over and over. There's no reason that you need to do every trick going full 3.
Yeah.
Full speed. You don't need to crush it.
Absolutely. He didn't even bend a prop when he came down the worst time.
Yeah,
Quote,
sometimes
unquote.
you don't need full send. You just need
Yeah.
quarter send. If you guys are confused, this is a drone. If you've never seen one before, check out the store below. There's drones there.
You can buy one of these things and recklessly fly around your friends.
While they look on the top!
I hope you learned something about shooting gaps and how to take something basic and work it up into a more complicated maneuver. If you enjoyed this, definitely check out one of our quad camp events. We do this sort of thing all the time.
You can get this kind of instruction in person instead of having to watch a video. But keep watching our videos.
Yeah, don't stop. Oh God, I almost walked into the orbit.
Oh God! We found one.
That is a gap. That is definitely a gap. It is a small space through which you would fly your quad.
Exactly.
Now,
Now, if you're looking for knife edge gaps, then you turn
gotta-
it sideways.
Nice.